Dismay is a sad term, isn't it? It's a sad word. Dismay is there's something foreboding about it. There's something dark about dismay. When you think about someone who's dismayed, you just think about someone who's just down and under and almost out, emotionally speaking. It's not a pleasant word at all. But it is a word that the scriptures use rather frequently. There are 17 times in the Old Testament when the word dismay is used, and that's good to know. And what I'd like to do today, one thing I'd like to do initially here, is I'd like to look at this word dismay in the scriptures and look at the words that are described around it that help us to understand and have a broader and wider and higher and longer and more robust understanding of what dismay really is. Let's do that right now. So, in the Old Testament, when dismay is mentioned, there are about 10 to 15 different words that accompany the word dismay that help us to understand it biblically, scripturally, and certainly much more robustly. Okay, one word that is used is it's described that hands go limp. One, probably the psalmist is talking about the dismay that he's going through. He's just talking about his hands just kind of go limp. They just lose their strength. Some passage talks about dismay, about how one's heart melts. That inside of me, just the inside of me, just melts, and I melt away in my heart and on my insides, and that's what dismay feels like. Oftentimes, when you see dismay mentioned in the scriptures, the word terror is mentioned, or fear. That's probably most frequently used when another word accompanies dismay. Oftentimes, it's in a terrorizing and fearful situation, and they're feeling terror or feel pain and anguish is something that's used in the vicinity of someone who is described in dismay. They describe themselves as being drained of power. That's similar to the hands going limp or the heart melting. They describe themselves as without strength, despair, just again, disheartened, feeble. Not only disheartened on the inside, but they just feel like they've gone feeble. Fainting may be something that would describe when someone is dismayed and disheartened. They feel feeble, they feel weak, they feel shaky. One passage in the Old Testament describes the dismayed as feeling troubled like the restless sea. They're troubled, they're tumultuous. Inwardly, they just can't find some place to sit down and be calm. They're agitated, they're restless as well. That describes, by the way, in the New Testament, Martha. In the New Testament, Martha, Martha, you're troubled and anxious about so many things. Another word is feeble or anxiety, I should say, excuse me. Another word that's used in the Old Testament when one describes dismay frequently is the word anxiety. There's dismay, and oftentimes the word fear and terror rises, but also the word anxiety and panic are words that accompany somebody who is in dismay. Talks about their spirit growing faint with them, pretty similar to the other things that we've mentioned. But anyway, when the word dismay is used, these are other ways that the psalmist, perhaps, or the prophets are talking about the Israelites, how when they're in dismay, these other words are words that are appropriate in describing somebody who is in dismay. Surely you can relate to 2, 4, 6, 7, or 8 of those things, that in times when you're dismayed, there are other things that you're feeling as well, probably really well described by these words that come out of the pages of Scripture. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go on to the second thing that we're going to do today. So let's think historically in terms of our videos. What happens when one is feeling in dismay? There's kind of a commonality of the way that the scriptures talk about dismay and how we get there and what we do with. Excuse me. Here's what always happens in the scriptures. You have somebody or a body of people who are going through extraordinarily difficult situations. You have David, who is surrounded by his enemies. You have the Israelites, who are in a life and death situation and surrounded by his enemies. But you find people or a person who is going through extremely difficult and fearful situations. So, circumstantially, externally, this person's going through something that's very, very big, very powerful, and very much instigating fear and anxiety. Now, so there's that external difficulty, big external difficulty that they're going through. The response to that externally difficult situation on the part of the individual, we'll go with an individual, is his heart melts. He becomes disheartened. He becomes feeble. He becomes shaky. He goes limp. He gets disheartened. His insides kind of drop. Those are the emotional reactions that we typically see in the scriptures when somebody is going through a situation that is difficult. It instigates the feelings of dismay, feebleness, disheartedness, and so forth and so on. Now, the third thing that is consistent in the passages that we look at, one is the external circumstances. Number two is the internal reaction, emotional reaction to that. There's panic, there's anxiety, there's fear, there's terror, there's dismay. But then, thirdly, what we find happening is fairly consistently in the scriptures, overwhelmingly so, that God's word comes to bear upon that person by way of a counselor, by way of a friend, by way of a pastor, by way of a prophet, perhaps. And when God comes and addresses the person who is going through that difficult time and reacting to it with dismay and feebleness and so forth and so on, what we've seen in the past is that the third thing is God comes and approaches that person and basically, I'm paraphrasing here, says, hey, the reason why you're feeling this way is because you're not thinking accurately. You're not thinking and believing accurately. You're being foolish. Let me remind you about this matter of God. So in Isaiah chapter 41, which we've looked at in the past, God comes through the prophet Isaiah and declares to the people, don't be in dismay. I will strengthen you. I will support you. I will be with you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I am your Lord. I am your God. And what God is trying to do by way of the prophet, for example, is to help the people to think clearly and to believe clearly about their situation and about God. And as we've looked in these previous videos, that helps a person what helps the person in that situation is like when God comes to them and reminds them about how big and powerful and loving and ever present He is in the life of that person. And when they begin to think accurately about how big and how loving and how ever present God is in His promises in the gospel, well, when a person does that and starts to think accurately, well, of course, his dismay and anxiety and fear goes down. And we've seen that in my life and video previous to this one. We saw it last time in the life of a client who was feeling anxiety and dismay, and how there was a situation, he felt that way. I was talking to him from the scriptures about God's promises to him and how his dismay went down as well. So that's kind of almost the paradigm of what we see consistently through the beginning and the end of the scriptures, of where something happens, horrible, difficult, the emotional reaction on the part of the believer, and God comes and helps him to rearrange his thinking and his believing. And in doing so, the anxiety and the fear and the dismay goes down. Okay? Let me give you an example. Let me give you two examples real quickly in conclusion here. I'm looking out my window right now, my sliding glass door, and I see a tree that's about 50 feet away. Now, what would you do if I said to you, maybe sitting next to me, and you see me plunging into dismay, and you see me getting terribly anxious, and I'm demonstrating weakness and feebleness, and I have panic and worry in my head, and you would say, Jeff, what's wrong? What's the matter? What's just happened? We were talking, and then all of a sudden you just kind of went limp. Jeff, what happened? And I were to say to you this, do you see that tree outside my sliding glass door? That tree is going to kill me. That tree is dangerous. That tree is going to kill me. It's about 4 feet wide. It's about 300 feet wide. And that tree is going to kill me today. There's no question in my mind that that tree is going to kill me today. Well, what would you do if you were sitting next to me engaged in a conversation, saw me go limp, and then gave you the explanation that that tree is going to pick itself up at some point during the day and come over and it's going to kill me? Well, you would probably say, Jeff, wait a minute, calm down, hold on, hold on, hold on. That tree is about 300 feet wide, and that tree probably has a root system that's going to go down 600 feet, 900 feet. That tree ain't going to pick itself up and move anywhere, Jeff. Number one, right? Number two, trees don't do that. Trees can fall down and kill people, but that tree is not going to fall down and kill you. You said it was going to get up and come over to you and kill you. Jeff, it's a root system that doesn't happen. The DNA of a tree doesn't do that. Trees can't do that. They don't do that. Trees can't commit murder, and so forth and so on. So what you would be trying to do is say, Jeff, come on, man. Come on, dude, think accurately. Trees can't do that. People can, but trees can't do that. I want you to think properly about that tree and believe accurately about that tree, that that tree cannot anymore do that. Then you can jump off of Niagara Falls, okay, and expect to live. Now, if he was convincing and persuasive, and I were to listen to him and agree with him eventually, and line up my thinking with him, that is kind of foolish. Trees can't do that. They don't do that. They won't do that. Trees can't commit murder. So, if I were to align my thinking and my faith and believing with what my friend would be saying to me about that tree and my fear, what would happen if I were to believe what he's saying and think accurately about what he is saying and think properly about that tree instead of inaccurately? What would happen to my dismay and my anxiety and my fear? Well, I think you would say along with me that my fear and my anxiety and my dismay relative to that tree would go dramatically down and probably go away completely. It's kind of a silly example, but nonetheless, it proves a point. Even in daily life, we can think inaccurately about things that make us afraid and anxiety filled and so forth and so on. But we need God's help to help us to think and believe properly about that. Let me give you one last example. There is also outside that sliding glass door an electrical cord. And let's just imagine that that cord is plugged in. And I'm about to grab that electrical cord for whatever purposes and maybe plug it into a outlet around the corner so that the outside lights will light, whatever. But I start to reach for that cord. But somebody says to me, they say very loudly, Jeff, stop, stop, don't touch that cord. And I kind of, whoa, what? He's saying, don't touch that cord. Why? Stop, back away. And I don't know why he's doing that, but I stop and I back off. And my friend says to me, Jeff, look at the end of that cord. And I look at the end of the cord and I see that there's nothing on the end of that cord except bare wires. Or something that makes that electrical cord very, very dangerous. Maybe he sees about where I'm about to grab it. Let's change it. He sees where I'm about to grab it. There are exposed cords there. The orange stuff over the top of the cord is gone. The covering of the wires are gone, and now there are wires, literally frayed wires exposed, and I don't see it. I'm about to grab that thing, and he tells me, stop. So here I am in the inverse. I have a dangerous situation, but I don't know it. I'm not thinking of that being a dangerous situation. It's just a power cord that I've used many times before. There's nothing wrong with that power cord. I'm thinking it's safe. I'm believing it's safe, and so I'm not afraid. I'm not anxious. And I'm about to reach up. But my friend says, "Stop now!" And I said, "Dude, what's going on? Why are you yelling at me?" And he says, "Look at the cord that I was looking at the cord, and I saw what you were about to do. Look at where you were about to grab that." And he shows me that the cord covering is gone. The covering and the covering of each of the two wires is gone. The wires are broken and now they're exposed and they're plugged in at the other end. He knew that, and he yelled to stop me. And now that I'm thinking clearly, because he's showing me this is a dangerous situation. Now that I'm lining myself up, thinking accurately, about that wire, that extension cord, and believing that it could kill me, well, then I'm not only I've not only backed off because he told me to, but now I'm backing off even further because now I knew that I was approaching something that was a dangerous situation, but I didn't know it. And that's not a good idea, particularly in a case like this. But conversely, in my other example was I thought something was dangerous when it really wasn't. And that's what we see a lot of the scriptures talking us about in the scriptures. Something very dangerous is happening. My initial, the person in the scriptures is reacting to it as though it's big and powerful and all-consumingly powerful. But someone comes alongside through the lens of the scriptures, like Isaiah chapter 41, and says, "Do not be afraid. Do not be disheartened. I am your God. I will support you. I will deliver you. I will strengthen you." And as I believe that and think accurately about the situation, then my dismay and my fear and my anxiety diminish. And that's what we see in the scriptures, Old Testament and in the New Testament as well. I hope that's helpful. In our next video, number 7, we're going to look at a very, very, very common and well-known example in the Old Testament, illustration or story, I should say, in the Old Testament, about this matter of dismay. Something's happening. The Israelites are in great dismay. Somebody shows up on the scene who is thinking properly and accurately and believing biblically about how great God is. And it changes everything. And we'll look at that in our next video together. Thanks for being with me.